She posted one final message on Facebook on the night she died. 7 words, raw, unfiltered, explosive. "I've never hated someone as much as I hate someone now." Less than an hour later, Lucy Landry was fighting for her life in the pitch black of a cold English country lane, just outside a mansion that was supposed to be her fairy tale. She had been beaten with a granite rolling pin. She had been stabbed 23 times. She screamed loud enough for neighbors to hear her from across the estate. She ran. She banged on windows. She begged for someone to help her. And all of that, every last desperate, terrifying second of it, happened while her children slept inside that house. This is the story of Harold Landry, a self-made Louisiana oil millionaire, a man who built his fortune from the muddy bayous of the Gulf Coast, who reinvented himself as an English country gentleman, and who, behind closed doors, harbored a darkness that would eventually consume everything he claimed to love. This is the story of Lucy Davies, a Welsh musician, a mother, and a woman who simply wanted her freedom back. And this is the story of what happens when a man with money, with rage, and with an iron belief that he could never be wrong decides that if he can have her, no one will. Love true crime. The Ultimate Serial Killer coloring book features 65 notorious killers brought to life in bold black and white line art. Single-sided pages, dark, detailed, unforgettable. Available now on Amazon. Harold grew up with roughly a dozen brothers and sisters in a large, working-class Cajun family. There was no silver spoon, no connections, and absolutely no shortcuts. What Harold had was raw ambition, a relentless drive, and the kind of hunger that only grows when you start with nothing. He made his way out through the oil industry, specifically through the engineering and design of massive cranes for offshore oil platforms. Harold built himself into a millionaire. By the time he was establishing himself around Covington, Louisiana, he was a high-profile employer, a man of substantial means, and a self-styled success story. He had also been married and divorced twice. He had 4 children in the United States, and by all public accounts, he provided for them. Friends described him as generous, sociable, and deeply attached to his family image. But his former Louisiana lawyer and longtime friend, Pat Fanning, painted a much more complicated picture. He described Harold as an angry guy, a man who was not easy to like. A man who, when he believed he was right, and Harold almost always believed he was right, was essentially immovable. That last detail matters more than almost anything else in this case. By 1999, Harold was 53 years old. He had his money, he had his properties, and he was healthy, wealthy, and incredibly lonely. So he did what many lonely people of that era were beginning to do. He went online. Harold Landry's online handle was Cajun H. He was trolling internet chat rooms, the wild, unfiltered social media of the late 90s. And somewhere in that digital maze he found her. Her handle was Misery. She was Lucy Davies, 28 years old, a British music student and a single mother raising a young son from a previous relationship. By all accounts, Lucy was extraordinary. Neighbors and friends would later describe her as bright, beautiful, and bursting with life. She had what one neighbor called an encyclopedic knowledge of classical music. She was gifted, she was warm, and she was funny. She was also, in 1999, 25 years younger than the Louisiana millionaire on the other end of that chat room. The relationship moved fast. Harold traveled to the UK, and the romance blossomed quickly. Within a short time, Lucy became pregnant. And Harold, a man who had already built 2 families and was now staring down the back half of his 50s, saw in Lucy something he desperately wanted, a second life. They married. Lucy and her young son moved into a world of financial security she had never known. And Harold made one of the most revealing decisions of this entire story. He moved to England. He didn't bring Lucy back to Louisiana. He left everything behind, his bayou roots, his oil empire, his friends, to follow her to the English countryside. He wanted to reinvent himself as an English country gentleman. In 2002, Pat Fanning met the couple while they were vacationing in Mexico. Lucy was vivid and clearly the center of Harold's world. Harold doted on her, giving her the holidays, the lifestyle, and the prestige. The couple settled on the Besford Court estate near Pershore, a prestigious development built around a Tudor manor. Their home was a large, imposing Cotswold-style house. Their daughter, Harriet, was born, and Lucy's son, James, grew up under their roof. From the outside, it looked like the life Harold had always wanted. But there was a side to Harold Landry that the glossy photographs couldn't cover up. He was a man who needed to win, who needed to be right, and who needed to feel in absolute control of the people around him. Friends told investigators that after a few years, the marriage became a volatile mixture of anger and alcohol. Arguments became more frequent and more dangerous. When Harold drank, he wasn't the generous man from Louisiana. He was something harder and colder. What nobody in England knew was that this was not the first time Harold's temper had crossed the critical line. Go back to February 6, 1994. 16 years before Lucy's death, Harold was involved with a woman in Louisiana. Her husband, Chris Price, tracked Harold down at a traffic light to confront him. What happened next was witnessed by a bystander. According to the account, Harold Landry pointed a .38 caliber handgun out of his car window. He said clearly, "I'm going to shoot you." And then he did. Chris Price was shot in the neck. He survived, but barely. Harold was arrested for attempted murder, but his absolute conviction that he was the real victim helped get the charge reduced to aggravated battery. He walked away with probation and a $500 fine. He never went to prison. He moved on, went online, and met Lucy. And nobody in England had any idea. By 2009, the marriage had fallen apart. Lucy had done something unimaginable to Harold. She started looking for a way out. She reconnected with a school friend on Facebook and decided she wanted a divorce. Harold's response was catastrophic. A man who had rebuilt his entire identity around this marriage could not process losing her, and he certainly couldn't accept losing her financially. He told a neighbor he didn't want Lucy to benefit from the divorce. He changed his will. By August 2009, they were living in separate bedrooms under the same roof, an arrangement that felt like a daily humiliation for Harold. The divorce negotiations were brutal. Harold watched as Lucy used money he had given her for an apartment to hire a powerful divorce lawyer instead. He believed she didn't deserve a penny. Monday, February 1, 2010. The tension inside that beautiful, expensive house reached a breaking point. It began with resentment and the ticking clock of a dead marriage. Lucy went to her Facebook page and typed those 7 words. "I've never hated someone as much as I hate someone now." Less than an hour later, the final argument began. It started over pieces of furniture Lucy wanted to take with her. The fight spilled into the kitchen, which is where Harold's defense begins, a defense the judge would later call a total invention. Harold claimed Lucy shoved him, that he stumbled into a baker's rack, grabbed a granite rolling pin, and threw it at her in a blind panic. He claimed she had a knife and he was acting in self-defense. But what happened next wasn't a panic, it was a hunt. Lucy ran, bleeding and seriously injured, out of the house and into the dark. She ran toward a neighbor's house, screaming and banging on windows. Harold followed her. He stabbed Lucy Landry 23 times. Many of those wounds were inflicted while she was already on the ground, trying to cover her body to survive. By the time help arrived, a butcher's knife was still in her body. She did not survive. Inside the house, their 7-year-old daughter and 14-year-old son had been there the whole time, unaware their mother was dying in the driveway. Harold was found shortly before midnight, walking alone on a dark country lane. He was calm. But before he started walking, he had driven to the cottage of his new partner. He told her something awful happened and handed her 3 banker's drafts totaling £30,000, a bundle of cash, and signed blank checks. He was managing the consequences before he was even arrested. In February 2011, Harold stood trial. The prosecution laid out a devastating case: the changed will, the refusal to let the marriage end on any terms but his own, and the sheer relentlessness of the attack. The defense argued manslaughter by provocation, that Lucy had humiliated him and he simply snapped. Harold took the stand, cried, and said he loved her, but claimed he couldn't remember the stabbing. Once again, he was the victim. The jury didn't buy it. It took them less than 4 hours to convict him of murder. Only after the verdict were they told about his 1994 shooting in Louisiana. The judge sentenced him to life with a minimum of 16 years, calling the attack unspeakable and unforgivable. From a legal standpoint, this case is a textbook example of how domestic homicide is prosecuted when physical evidence destroys a panic narrative. A man who throws a rolling pin in a momentary loss of control does not then chase a victim into the night to deliver 23 stab wounds. The prosecution's use of courtroom animation was key, visualizing the geography of the violence. Furthermore, Harold's behavior after the crime, the immediate transfer of large sums of money, is not the act of a man in shock. It is the act of a man who knew exactly what he had done. Psychologically, Harold fits a chilling pattern: the controlling partner who uses financial dominance to bind someone to them, and who responds to the loss of that control with lethal aggression. His inability to accept responsibility, even 16 years apart in 2 different countries, shows a man who believed the rules of society simply didn't apply to him. That is the story of Harold Landry, and the murder of Lucy Landry. If this case stayed with you, please share it and leave a comment below. For more international true crime stories the mainstream media won't touch, subscribe to the channel. We're here every week. Lucy Davies is remembered. We'll see you in the next one.